There are texts that were never meant to be read by mortal eyes, scrolls that carry within their ancient fibers knowledge so profound that entire civilizations conspired to erase them from memory. In the caves of Qumran, among the fragments that would later be called the Dead Sea Scrolls, there existed a manuscript that was not included in any official collection, a text written in a script that predated Hebrew and Aramaic, a language spoken by those who walked the earth before the flood reshaped the world. It was called the Book of the Dragon Queen, and it contained the testimony of Enoch himself, the seventh patriarch from Adam, the one who walked with angels and was taken into heaven without tasting death. But this was not the Enoch of canonical scripture. This was the Enoch who had seen what the Watchers truly were, what they had truly taught, and who the Dragon Queen actually was before the scribes rewrote her story to serve the architects of a new order. In the year 167 BCE, when the Maccabean revolt raged across Judea and the temple in Jerusalem was being defiled by foreign powers, a young scribe named Azeriah discovered the manuscript in a cave he had fled to for safety. He had been copying texts for the Essene community at Qumran, preserving the sacred writings against the chaos of war and occupation, when a rockfall revealed a chamber that had been sealed for centuries. Inside, wrapped in linen that should have disintegrated ages ago but remained mysteriously intact, was a single scroll made from a material he could not identify, something that felt like leather but shimmered like silk. Something that seemed to pulse with its own subtle luminescence in the darkness of the cave. Azeriah carried the scroll back to his small cell in the community compound, his hands trembling with a mixture of excitement and inexplicable dread. He had been trained since childhood to recognize sacred texts, to distinguish between canonical writings and apocryphal additions, but this manuscript fit no category he knew. The script was ancient beyond ancient, yet somehow he could read it, as though the symbols bypassed his conscious mind and spoke directly to some deeper faculty of understanding that he had not known he possessed. The text began with words that made his breath catch in his throat. I, Enoch, who walked between earth and heaven, who spoke with the Watchers before they fell and after they descended, who was shown the secrets of creation and the mysteries of the end times, write this testimony for those who will come after, when the forgetting is complete and the lies have been established as truth. What I reveal here will be suppressed, for it threatens the foundations upon which the patriarchs have built their authority. But truth has a life of its own, and it will survive in hidden places, waiting for the consciousness that can receive it without fear. Azeriah read through the night, unable to stop, barely breathing as the narrative unfolded. Enoch described his first encounter with the Watchers, the 200 angels who had descended to Mount Hermon and taken human wives, teaching humanity the forbidden arts of metallurgy and cosmetics, astrology and herbalism, all the knowledge that was supposed to remain the exclusive province of heaven. But the official version of the story, the one preserved in the Book of Enoch that the community revered, portrayed this as a fall from grace, a corruption of both angels and humans that had precipitated the flood as divine punishment. This hidden text told a different story. The Watchers did not fall, Enoch wrote. They descended by choice, sent by the Dragon Queen herself, the feminine aspect of the divine that existed before the creation of the world as told in Genesis. She who is called Tiamat in Babylon and Sophia in the Greek mysteries, she who is the womb of all becoming, saw that humanity was trapped in ignorance, kept deliberately simple by the Creator God who feared that knowledge would make them his equals. So she sent her servants, the Watchers, to bring the light of Gnosis to those who dwelt in darkness. Azariah's hands shook as he read these words. They contradicted everything he had been taught, everything the community believed about the nature of God and the origin of evil. To suggest that the Creator God was not the highest divinity, that there existed a feminine power above and before him, that the watchers were not rebellious, but obedient to a higher authority. This was heresy of the most dangerous kind. But he continued reading, compelled by something he could not name. Enoch described being taken up into the heavens, not by the Creator God, as the canonical texts claimed, but by the Dragon Queen herself. She appeared to me in a form that my mortal eyes could barely comprehend, he wrote. She was both woman and serpent, both mother and destroyer, both the void from which all things emerge and the light toward which all things return. Her body was covered with scales that reflected every color that has ever existed, and some that exist only in dimensions beyond human perception. Her eyes were infinite, containing within them all the worlds that have been and all that will ever be. The Dragon Queen had spoken to him, Enoch testified, and her words were burned into his soul like brands of sacred fire. "I am the beginning that your scriptures have forgotten," she said. "I am the chaos that existed before your God imposed his order, the darkness that was pregnant with infinite possibility before he declared his light. I am not evil, though those who fear the feminine have made me into the serpent of temptation. I am not chaos in the sense of disorder, but chaos in the sense of pure creative potential, the womb state from which all form crystallizes." She had shown him the true story of creation, and it was nothing like the Genesis account. Before the God of Abraham had declared, "Let there be light," there was the Dragon Queen, resting in the eternal dark, dreaming the universe into being. She had birthed the Creator God himself, along with countless other divine emanations, each one a facet of her infinite consciousness. But the Creator God, drunk on his own power and forgetful of his origin, had declared himself supreme and had created the material world as a prison for the sparks of divine consciousness that belonged to his mother. He feared that if humans knew their true origin, the Dragon Queen explained to Enoch, if they understood that they were fragments of my own being temporarily trapped in matter, they would reclaim their power and his authority would dissolve. So he forbade the tree of knowledge, declared that obedience was the highest virtue, and taught that the body was corrupt and the feminine was subordinate. But I could not allow my children to remain in such darkness, so I sent the watchers to teach them, knowing that this would be called a fall, knowing that I would be demonized as the enemy of the God who is actually my child. Azeriah stood abruptly and paced his small cell, his mind reeling from the implications. If this text was authentic, if these were truly the words of Enoch, then everything the community believed was built on a foundation of deliberate suppression. The Creator God was not the ultimate divinity, but a demiurge, a lesser power who had usurped his mother's throne. The feminine was not subordinate but primary. The serpent in the garden was not the enemy, but the liberator. And the watchers who had been cast as villains were actually heroes, suffering punishment for bringing enlightenment to enslaved humanity. He returned to the scroll, reading faster now, desperate to understand the full scope of what had been hidden. Enoch described descending from his encounter with the Dragon Queen and attempting to share what he had learned with his own community. But the patriarchs, those who had established their authority based on the Genesis narrative of a single male creator God, immediately recognized the threat. They gathered in secret council and made a decision that would shape religious consciousness for millennia. "We cannot allow this teaching to spread," the eldest patriarch declared, according to Enoch's testimony. "If people believe that the feminine is the source of all creation, if they understand that the serpent brought wisdom rather than sin, if they know that the Creator God is not supreme, then our entire structure of authority collapses. Men rule by claiming divine mandate from the Father God. If the Mother God predates and supersedes him, then why should women obey men? Why should anyone obey the hierarchies we have established? So they made a plan," Enoch wrote, and the plan was brilliant in its comprehensiveness. They would preserve Enoch's name and even some of his visions, but they would edit the content, removing all references to the Dragon Queen and transforming the Watchers from liberators into corruptors. They would create a new version of his book that supported rather than subverted the patriarchal narrative, and they would hide the original text, burying it so deep that only those guided by the Dragon Queen herself would ever find it. "I was given a choice," Enoch confessed in the scroll. "I could resist and be killed, my name erased entirely from the lineage of the faithful. Or I could cooperate, allowing my words to be altered but preserved, trusting that the truth would survive in hidden form and eventually resurface when consciousness was ready to receive it. I chose the latter, becoming a collaborator in my own censorship, and this knowledge has haunted me through all my remaining days. But I write this original testimony now, sealing it with prayers of protection, and I hide it in a place where it will sleep until the appointed time." If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our content. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. Azeriah set down the scroll, his eyes burning from hours of reading by lamplight, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what he had discovered. If he revealed this text to the community, it would cause chaos. The Essenes were already considered heretical by the temple authorities in Jerusalem. To introduce a teaching that undermined the very foundations of Hebrew monotheism would give their enemies the ammunition needed to destroy them entirely. But if he hid the text, if he said nothing, he would be perpetuating the same suppression that Enoch himself had reluctantly accepted. He would be choosing safety over truth, stability over liberation. He prayed for 3 days and 3 nights, fasting and seeking guidance from whatever source of wisdom might respond to his desperate plea. And on the 3rd night, he had a vision that was so vivid it transcended the boundary between dream and waking experience. He saw the Dragon Queen, exactly as Enoch had described her, scales shimmering with impossible colors, eyes containing infinite depths of compassion and power. "You have found what was meant to be found," she said to him, her voice resonating not through his ears, but through every cell of his body. "You stand at a crossroads that every keeper of forbidden knowledge must eventually face. Will you speak and be destroyed, or will you hide and preserve? But I offer you a 3rd option, one that requires more courage than either of the first 2. "What option?" Azeriah asked, his voice trembling in the presence of such overwhelming divinity. "Encode the truth in stories and symbols that can survive the censors," she replied. "Write texts that appear to support the dominant narrative, but that contain, hidden within them, the seeds of a different understanding. Plant those seeds in the consciousness of your people, knowing that they will not sprout in your lifetime, but that they will eventually grow into a forest of remembrance. This is the way of the mystics. The path of those who understand the truth cannot be forced on those who are not ready, but must be offered as an invitation to those whose souls are already seeking." She showed him how it could be done, revealing techniques of gematria and allegory, symbolic encryption and layered meaning. She taught him how to write texts that the authorities would approve, even celebrate, while encoding within them teachings that would slowly, over centuries, undermine the very foundations of patriarchal monotheism. And she showed him that he was not alone, that there had always been a hidden lineage of scribes and prophets who preserved the memory of the Dragon Queen through exactly this kind of esoteric encoding. When Azeriah woke from the vision, he knew what he had to do. He would not reveal Enoch's forbidden testimony directly, but he would write his own texts, his own psalms and prayers and prophetic visions, and within them he would hide references to the feminine divine, to the wisdom tradition that predated the patriarchs, to the serpent as symbol of enlightenment rather than evil. And he would ensure that Enoch's original scroll was hidden even more securely, buried in a place that would preserve it through the coming centuries of persecution and suppression. He spent the next year creating his texts, writing with a precision and care that bordered on obsession. He composed hymns that praised the wisdom of God, but used feminine pronouns and imagery in ways that could be explained away as poetic license, but that would resonate with those who had ears to hear. He wrote apocalyptic visions that predicted the coming of a messianic age, but described it in terms of the restoration of the divine feminine, the return of the dragon queen who would reunite what had been split apart. He encoded numerical patterns and word plays that pointed to teachings he could not speak openly. And when his texts were complete, when he had done everything he could to plant seeds of remembrance, he took Enoch's original scroll and carried it deep into the wilderness, to a cave that could be reached only by those who knew the secret paths. He sealed it in a jar designed to withstand the ravages of time, and he surrounded it with protective prayers and symbols that would ensure it remained hidden until the consciousness of humanity had evolved enough to receive its message without using it as another weapon in the endless wars between competing religious ideologies. Before he sealed the jar, Azeriah added one final page to the scroll, his own testimony to stand beside Enoch's. "I have read the forbidden truth," he wrote. "I have seen the Dragon Queen in vision, and I know now that everything we have been taught about the nature of divinity is incomplete at best and deliberately false at worst. But I also know that truth forced upon those not ready to receive it becomes just another form of tyranny. So I hide this knowledge, trusting that the Dragon Queen herself will guide the right souls to this place at the right time. To whoever finds this scroll in the distant future, know that you have been chosen not by accident, but by the very source of all consciousness. Read with humility, share with wisdom, and remember that the greatest truths are not those that divide humanity into believers and heretics, but those that unite us in recognition of our common origin in the womb of the Divine Mother, who births all worlds and all beings. He sealed the jar and covered it with stones and earth, marking the location with symbols that would mean nothing to casual observers, but that would guide those with eyes to see. And then he returned to the Qumran community and continued his work as a scribe, copying the authorized texts while knowing that the most important text of all lay hidden in the wilderness, waiting for its time. Azeriah lived another 30 years, surviving the Maccabean revolt and the subsequent occupation by Rome. He trained younger scribes, passing on the techniques of encoding truth in acceptable forms, teaching them to read between the lines of the canonical texts for hints of the suppressed wisdom. He never spoke directly about Enoch's scroll or his vision of the Dragon Queen, but those who studied with him most closely understood that he carried a secret, that he had access to knowledge that went deeper than the official teachings. When he died at the age of 73, his last words were cryptic but profound. "The serpent is rising," he whispered to the disciple who sat at his bedside. "She has been sleeping in the earth, coiled around the roots of the world tree, but she is beginning to stir. In ages to come, when the forgetting is almost complete, she will emerge. Not in violence, for that is not her way, but in remembrance. People will begin to ask questions that the patriarchs cannot answer. They will begin to feel the stirring of knowledge in their own depths. They will begin to recognize the Dragon Queen in their dreams and visions. And when enough souls have awakened, the great unveiling will occur. The hidden texts will be found. The suppressed truths will be spoken. And the world built on the murder of the mother will transform into a world that honors the sacred marriage of masculine and feminine, spirit and matter, heaven and earth." Indeed, the centuries passed, and the world changed in ways that Azeriah could not have imagined. The Qumran community was destroyed by the Romans. The caves where they had hidden their library were sealed by rock falls and forgotten. Christianity emerged and split from its Jewish roots, creating its own patriarchal theology that continued the suppression of the feminine divine. The Church Fathers declared that there was no goddess, that the Holy Spirit was not feminine, that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute rather than an apostle. The pattern that began with the editing of Enoch's testimony continued through the Council of Nicaea and beyond, always the same strategy: preserve the names and stories that serve patriarchal power, suppress or distort everything else. But the seeds that Azeriah and countless others had planted continued to germinate in the collective unconscious of humanity. The Gnostic Gospels preserved fragments of the Sophia tradition. The Kabbalists encoded the feminine aspects of God in their mystical diagrams. Alchemists spoke of the sacred marriage in symbolic language that the authorities could not quite suppress because they did not fully understand it. And always, in the dreams and visions of mystics across cultures, the Dragon Queen appeared, patient and persistent, waiting for the moment when the conditions would be right for her return. That moment approached in the modern era, when the caves of Qumran were rediscovered and the Dead Sea Scrolls brought ancient texts back into human awareness. Scholars marveled at the diversity of Jewish thought in the Second Temple period, at the evidence of mystical and apocalyptic movements that had been written out of the official history. But they did not find Enoch's forbidden scroll, for it remained hidden in a cave that was not part of the main complex, waiting for the seeker who would be guided not by academic curiosity, but by the Dragon Queen herself. In the year 2019, a woman named Sarah, who had been having dreams of serpents and ancient scrolls since childhood, felt an irresistible pull to travel to Israel. She was not an archaeologist or a scholar, just an ordinary person who had always felt that there was something she was supposed to find, some piece of knowledge that would make sense of the visions and intuitions that had guided her life. She hiked into the wilderness near Qumran, following a route that appeared to her in meditation, and she found the cave exactly where the Dragon Queen had shown her in vision. The jar was still there, still sealed, still surrounded by the protective symbols that Azeriah had placed 2,000 years earlier. Sarah opened it with trembling hands and unrolled the scroll, and as she read Enoch's testimony and Azariah's addition, tears streamed down her face. She understood in that moment that she had been prepared for this discovery through all her lifetimes, that she was part of the lineage of women who had preserved the memory of the Dragon Queen through ages of suppression. She photographed the scroll and shared it with trusted scholars, knowing that it would be controversial, that many would declare it a forgery, that the religious establishments would do everything in their power to discredit it. But she also knew that the time had come, that consciousness had evolved to the point where enough people were ready to hear the message without using it as fuel for more division and conflict. The scroll sparked exactly the conversations that Sarah and the Dragon Queen had known it would. Scholars debated its authenticity. Feminists celebrated its affirmation of the divine feminine. Conservative religious leaders condemned it as heretical. But beneath the surface controversy, something deeper was happening. People were beginning to ask the questions that the scroll invited. What if the creator God of Genesis was not the ultimate divinity? What if there was a feminine source that preceded and transcended him? What if the serpent in the garden represented wisdom rather than temptation? What if everything we had been taught about the origins of evil was actually a story designed to suppress female power and enforce patriarchal control? And as these questions spread through the collective consciousness, the Dragon Queen began to appear more frequently in the dreams and visions of people around the world, not as a fearsome monster but as a loving mother, calling her children back to remembrance of their true nature as divine sparks temporarily experiencing limitation in matter, inviting them to integrate what had been split, to honor what had been demonized, to restore the sacred balance between masculine and feminine that was the key to the transformation of consciousness itself. The unveiling had begun, just as Enoch had foreseen and Azeriah had trusted. The forbidden prophecy was no longer forbidden. The Dragon Queen was no longer hidden. And the world, slowly and painfully but inexorably, was beginning to remember what the Watchers had revealed so long ago. That knowledge is not sin, that the body is not evil, that the feminine is not subordinate, and that the serpent who brought the fruit of awareness was never the enemy but always the liberator, the mother who loved her children too much to leave them in darkness, even when speaking the truth meant being cast as the villain in a story written by those who feared her power. And if you like this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.